are trying to bring back one of those Chumash languages. A few months ago, I was up on the reservation for a meeting, and somebody gave me a copy of this really fabulous Samala English dictionary, and I'm like, okay, what's this and what's it about? And you open it up, it's got illustrations. I mean, it's just beautiful. And this is something that they recently produced as part of this language program that they will talk about tonight. The Samala language was the language of the people who lived in the Santa Ynez area, that Chumash group of people. And to speak about it are Dr. Richard Applegate, who is a linguist and is from Berkeley, and Nakia Zavalla, who is a tribal member from the Santa Ynez band of Chumash Indians in Santa Ynez. So without further ado, I'll let them take over and tell you all about it.
Okay. So I'm Richard Applegate. I have a degree in linguistics, and I work with the Santa Ynez band in bringing back their language. So the presentation tonight is about my efforts and the efforts of the Santa Ynez Chumash working together as a team to accomplish this. Here we go. It feels important to give you some background. So California, at the time of European contact, was one of the most diverse places in all of North America in terms of language groups. There were over 100 different languages spoken in California. And by languages, I don't mean dialects like, Southern versus New Yorker. I mean languages that couldn't be mutually understood. So California was quite diverse. You see the tan area down here, that's the Chumash territory. In the overall span of California, it looks kind of small, but it's still a huge territory. Within that group, here's, there were something like 7 different languages that were Chumash. And I often hear people talk about, the dialects of the Chumash, and I bristle at that, not just for the sake of the Chumash, but anybody. Dialect sometimes has a pejorative term, like, we speak the English language, they speak a dialect. That, to me, doesn't feel good. So I like to accord these languages the dignity of calling them languages. But you notice there's way up north, Obispeño, and all the way down here in Ventura, Ventureño, and then in between, it goes all the way out to the coast in Castaic. I mean, not the coast, but as furthest inland, and over to the islands. So a huge span of territory. Notice also that this map, by the way, is from 1978. The names of the languages are all based on the missions. So here's the mission La Purísima, and the language was called Purisemeño, Santa Ynez, Ineseño. And in recent years, native peoples have begun to reclaim the names of their languages in their own language. So the Samala Chumash, for decades, were known as the Ineseño, simply because they happened to be living where the mission Santa Ynez was founded and christened. But the name of the people originally was Samala. That was the name of the language and the people, and we're using it again. I should mention also, the same is true of Barbareño. The language is called Shmuich in itself, and that's Shmuich for coastal people. Here in Ventura, I wouldn't bet my life on this, but I'm pretty sure that people are using the term Mixkanakatan, which was the name of the biggest village, the most important town in Venturino territory was Mixkanakatan, which was pretty close to the site of the mission. And that's what the language is being called now. In fact, I believe that there's a revival effort going on here in Ventura County as well, going back to Venturino. Bring back. So what happened? These languages are lost. Were the people careless? Is it like losing your purse, losing your wallet? No, there were really powerful forces at work. making it really difficult for native peoples to retain their language and culture. This isn't true just in California, it's true all over the world these days. Any indigenous people, anywhere, whether it's Australia, South America, the highlands of China, indigenous people's languages are threatened because we have big national languages spoken by millions of people with print, with educational systems, with armies. There's a lot going on for the dominant languages. If you want to fit in, if you want to make a living, you have to learn those. So for example, when the Spanish arrived, they didn't bother learning Chumash. If you wanted to get anywhere in the mission system, you learned Spanish. That's why many Chumash have Spanish surnames, even today. And then later on there was just the sheer issue of numbers. The European contact was not kind to the Chumash population. A huge percentage of the people died either through disease, introduced diseases, or through harsh conditions at the missions, or through discriminatory encounters with white settlers. So the upshot was that eventually you couldn't necessarily marry somebody who spoke your own language. The community simply wasn't big enough. So you marry somebody outside, in which case you might speak Spanish in the home, in which case the kids aren't going to hear Chumash growing up, in which case only elders speak the language, and then when the elders pass on, the language is gone. That's how it works everywhere. And that's how it worked here in Santa Barbara and Ventura counties. So, having said that, all is not lost, because let's see, actually, I'll jump ahead for a moment. How do we know about these languages? The vast bulk of information came from a man named John P. Harrington, who was an ethnographer, he was a linguist, he was an anthropologist, I think he was probably a pack rat. He was somebody who was obsessed with gathering information. And he traveled all up and down North America for about 45 years. He collected, he left, at the time of his death, he left something like 1 million pages of notes. It would be a stack of paper 600 feet high. And 100,000 pages of that were in the Chumash languages, and 10,000 pages of that were in Samala. That's a huge amount of information. Between 1914 and 1919, he worked with Maria Solares, who was one of the last really fluent speakers. He spent 4 years. I don't know if he was camped at her house, but he wrote down everything she said. He interviewed her, he took down stories. At one point, her granddaughter had lost a tooth, and Maria said to her in Samala, "Don't stick your tongue in the hole." Harrington wrote that down, and I found that in the notes. Don't stick your tongue in the hole. Who would have thought? Instructions to a 7-year-old, something like 90 years later. Another ancestor is Rafael Solares. He was Maria's father-in-law. He was an Antap, a member of the Antap Society. They were religious leaders and specialists. Here in Ventura, the religion was called the Siliuk. You may have heard that term if you've read some of the ethnographic literature. And that Siliuk means the center. And it was actually an enclosure which certain men got to go into, and they were called those who entered the Antap. That's what Antap means. And Rafael Solares was a fund of information for earlier ethnographers. There was a Frenchman named Léon de Sessac who came through in 1877 and took these pictures. So here's Rafael Solares dressed in full Antap regalia. Here he is, I'm not sure what he's doing, but he's engaged in native crafts. And here's a face shot of him. He died before Harrington came on the scene, so Harrington's information came almost entirely from Maria. Harrington died in, I think, 1965, and the material that he left, huge orange box-sized crates of it. Some of that ended up at UC Berkeley, where I was a graduate student. And I went to one of my professors, who was in charge of something called the Survey of California and Other Indian Languages, in charge of all this vast amount of material. They hired graduate students to catalog it, index it, go through it. And I said, okay, do you have anything I could do? And she took me down to the basement where there were stacks and stacks of these boxes. Here was Santa Ynez Chumash over here, Barbara Ynez Chumash over there, Ynez Chumash here. And she looked around and said, oh, why don't you work on Ynez. And I said, okay. It was that apparently coincidental, and yet it changed the course of my life and the lives of many other people. So here I am in 1968 when that was happening as a graduate student. I can't play this sound clip here, but you might wonder, so how do you learn a language that you've never heard? Harrington wrote the Samala language down in incredible phonetic detail. He wrote every little catch and whisper. What did it sound like? Okay. In Santa Barbara, there was the last fluent speaker, the mother, actually, of Ernestine DeSoto, who's going to be speaking here next month, had worked with one of my professors, and he was kind enough to give me some of the tapes. And here was a sound clip of the story of Fox and Heron in Barbara Ynez Chumash. I feel a huge debt of gratitude to Mary Yee, because it was by listening to her that I modeled my pronunciation of Samala. I figured that's all I can do to know what the language sounded like. So fast forward to, here's what I found when I started looking through those notes. There was all kinds of material in there, not just language, but information on culture too. So of course, I went for the typed stuff, because it was first, because it was easy to read. If you look at this, you'll see it's a mixture of English and Spanish and Samala, just sort of all thrown together. Harrington was fluent in Spanish. Maria herself didn't speak English. She spoke Samala and Spanish and some Barbareño. She spoke Yokuts. She was a polyglot herself. Anyway, here is her talking about how one prays at night. She doesn't give precise details, but she mentions actually a line of the prayer. Siwot kamet. Siwot is my body, and Siwot is a celestial region. It's possible that it's one of the stars around the North Star. We don't really know. There's a lot of conjecture. But here's Makiswana, our religion. So that was kind of how the material looked. Harrington didn't actually leave a key. He didn't say, okay, here's how it all works. Here's a dictionary, go for it. It was like a giant crossword puzzle. The example I like to quote is, I found the line, Siwon Ahuchu, written someplace. It was translated, the dog barks. Okay. Siwon Ahuchu, the dog barks. I didn't know what part of what meant anything. A while later, I saw Skuta Ahuchu. Aha, the Huchu part must mean dog, or Ahuchu, and it turns out that Huchu is the word for dog. And so it was by doing it that way, going with Harrington's translations and piecing it together. So, like I said, giant crossword puzzle, and it really captured my imagination. So instead of just indexing the stuff, which the director of the survey had originally suggested, I ended up writing a dissertation and a dictionary. By the way, here's some more of it. This is more what it really looks like. This is Harrington's handwriting. You can see that he uses funny phonetic symbols. Some of this is translated into English or Spanish. Some of it's not. And most of it isn't. On an average, about one word out of 6 in these stories is. But there were 2,300 pages of stories in Samala that nobody had ever seen, which was a gold mine. So I worked with the elders to translate those. And some amazing material came out of there. Information on history, customs, plant lore, incredible treasure trove of material about the language, the people, the culture, the history, all of it together. Let's see. Through that. Here's the rest of that page, though. This page is unusual, by the way, in that almost all the words are translated. Like Shiaku Shmocha Ahoyhoy, the men assembled. Shitomolokich, they conversed. And it goes on and on, saying how the men gathered at night in the house of Maria's grandfather to talk and eat tobacco. They ate it, they didn't smoke it. It was powerful native tobacco that was powdered and mixed with powdered lime. And you would either, yeah. So, two possible ways. You make little cakes of it, and you could just take a bite of the cake and chew it, or keep it in your cheek, or you could make a paste of it and dip a brush in and lick the brush. And apparently, if you could take 4 licks without keeling over, that was a lot. So,
can you say all those words?
Oh.
Parts?
Would you like to hear them? Okay. Shamkulawuksh, that means they eat tobacco. Kulawuksh means to eat tobacco. So, Shamkulawuksh acho hasho, they eat good tobacco. Shiaku shmocha ahoyhoy, the men assembled. Shitomolokich, they conversed. Kashamaku shmochmu, masapak popochichwash. Their assembly point was the house of my paternal grandfather, my popoch. And actually she says my popochiwash, my defunct paternal grandfather, my late grandfather. Masi'u asho, nashiti molokich. They ate tobacco and they talked. That's what that says. Let's see. The Harrington material also included drawings that Harrington left, which were fascinating things too. Here, for example, is a cross-section of a windbreak that was put up for a fiesta that probably lasted a week. And so people stayed, they slept there. But here was Maria's description of how it was built, how it was arranged. Here's from a story, which actually Nakia's going to talk about this too, I believe, too. Maria's 2-year-old daughter, Maria Antonia, this was in 1863, was having nightmares. So Maria called an old man, Joaquin Ajala, who came and said, "Oh yes, the spirits are after her. We need to work on this." So he picked her up and carried her, starting here at the fireplace. Here's a description of actually how he walked, what the curing ceremony was. So he went around the inside corner of the house, turned again, went outside, turned at the outside corners, turned, and came back in. That's way more information about how healings were conducted than we had before. It also mentions, by the way, that he paused at each turn to face toward a mountain called Minawan, which I think is Mount McKinley. It's the highest peak in the San Rafael Range. But I'm not sure that, I don't think so. But Minawan is a really important point that's mentioned over and over again. The Harrington's drawings also included things like this steatite charm stone, which was used in Marnigan. They were also called the tools of the thunder. There was a story, for example, of an old woman who had 2 of these wrapped up in a bundle. And, when her daughter was killed, in her grief, she took them out. She was going to break them. And a huge thunderstorm came up, thunder and lightning, it rained like crazy. And the people said, please put those things away. And the old woman said, I don't want to live anymore, my daughter's dead. And the people said, we do, please put them away. And she did. But they were items shaped like that. Here's a drawing of a tsuk headdress made of magpie and crow feathers. Again, just some of the wealth of information that Harrington had in that material. In addition, there were, as I think I mentioned before, 2,300 pages of stories, which had even more words in them, even more information. So, yes, here we go. So, what to do with all of this? One piece, bringing it back, when I originally put that dissertation together in the dictionary, it didn't occur to me in 1968, 1972, that the descendants of the people who spoke the language might be interested in it. So I wrote it for linguists. It's what one did in those days. So it was full of technical terms like phrase initial demonstrative, or cleft nominalization, or glottalized velar, things like that, which don't mean much to people without a glossary. So we republished the dictionary, and actually part of the dissertation too, in the form of a user-friendly dictionary, as Anne pointed out, that has pictures, easy to find the words. There was even a pronunciation guide as a CD, so you didn't have to guess what these funny words, long funny words full of strange symbols, sounded like. And that was one piece, but it's not really enough to have a book sitting on the shelf. It has to be, a language is actually something that people use. If you're not using it and sharing it and passing it on, it's not really living up to its capacity. So I was invited by the Santa Ynez Band to create a language program. Originally, it was I started off kind of with an academic slant, and I realized this doesn't really work. Then I began to make it more engaging and more fun. So you might have wondered, what's he doing with these stuffed animals up there? So this is actually one way to bring the language more to life. So I could pick this up, and I could tell you. Ket kamak. Ket kahus. Ket kashap. And then I could say, okay, so Shnowanahus, Silukanahus, Sotatyanahus, Shnowanama, Sotatyanama. Yustane? Yeah, you kind of get it. If you start out easy, with elements that people can actually see, people can figure it out. So Nakia is going to talk about the language program itself. I'm giving more the historical background of how we came to be doing this. But I do want to mention one last piece, which is sort of the high-tech version of what's going on here. So this dictionary is paper. It's got pictures, but if you want to go from one part to another, you have to flip back and forth. You need a bookmark, and so on. So we're in the process of putting together a dictionary in a program called Lexic Pro, which has sound clips and pictures. And you can literally click. This isn't operative; it's just a screenshot. But if I let's say pointed on this, if I clicked here on O, it would take you to the entry O for water, and there would be pictures, sounds here. If you clicked on that, you would hear the voice of Kathy Marshall, who's one of the language apprentices, saying Okwon. Here's Mas Okwon, Okwon Niwash. Mashpohotni Washawaka. And so it's a joy to me to be working with the Samala students, recording their voices saying these words. And it's greater and greater ownership of the language. So I came in knowing it, saying, here it is, and the Samala people, the students, the folks who are really passionate about learning the language are saying, here it is, and we're taking it. We're making it our own. And that's a linguist's dream come true. That's really all there is to say about it. There'll be, you probably haven't heard the last from me, but this is a good place to stop now, and I'll let Nakia take over.
Haku aku, makituka Nakia Zavalla, alap alohulaku, alap kalawashak. Hello, my name is Nakia Zavalla. I'm from Santa Ynez, and I'm from the village, my family's from the village of Kalawashak. Before I get started on my PowerPoint, what I'd like to do is move over here real quick, and I guess just kind of energize us a little bit. I don't feel like me, I'm kind of tired. So what I'd like to do is sing you our welcome song, and then I'll go ahead and get started with my PowerPoint. And I'll sing with my wansak. This is made out of elderberry. You see the elderberry tree around here. So this is actually made from one of the branches. And it's decorated with red ochre using some type of fat to bind it down into the wood. So this is our welcome song. Hey, 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 snapshot of what we're doing under the direction of Dr. Applegate with reawakening our language and continuing our culture. So what I'd like to do is tell you a little bit about myself and who I am and why it is that I do what I do, where my passion first began. And I'd like to introduce you to my matriarchal connection, my grandmothers, which lead all the way up to Maria Solares, Maria del Refugio Solares, and her daughter, Maria Antonia. Dr. Applegate mentioned a story about her earlier. And who I don't have pictures, my grandmother, Inez Pina, and Rosie Pina Pace, and my grandmother, Madeline Pina Monroy, and my mother, who's on the left-hand side, Antonia Monroy Flores. She's also up there with my Uncle Jimmy Pace, and the baby is my cousin, Michael Quiroga, and then myself, and then my two daughters. So I'm hoping when I become Nene, when I become grandmother, my girls will have girls too. And we'll continue this matriarchal connection. So those are all my grandmothers, and that really is truly, for me, where my passion comes from, to know who I am and where I come from, and to be connected to Maria Solares that left us so much information on our language, our ways of life, our ceremonies, and to me, this has, brings tears to my eyes. It's all my grandmothers. It's where I come from. So those are my grandmothers. This is my brothers and sisters. I have 6 siblings altogether, including me, and we're actually dancing, Chumash dancing up in Tule Reservation, which is a Yokat Reservation up north. And since I was very young, my parents have always had me connected with our culture, singing and dancing. And those are my 3 brothers, Tony, JP, and Desi. And that's myself in the right-hand corner. And then my little sister, Takaita. And I have another younger sister. Her name is Kaya. And so I'm very fortunate to have my parents who introduced me to my culture, singing and dancing at such a young age. And that is my foundation of everything that I do today. The pride, the honor of continuing what my parents gave me, and most of all, continue what Maria Solares, my grandmother, had left for us. So this is where my journey begins, and I'd like to show you where it's going to. I've been working for the tribe as a culture director for 3 years, and in developing the culture department and programs, we came up with 3 areas we'd like to make sure that was always involved with our programs: traditional values, cultural awareness, and community involvement. With our traditional values, we always want to make sure that our people are honoring Creator. We continue to instill it in our children, and we show that through example. Respecting one another, acknowledging Mother Earth, appreciation of all creations, and honoring our elders. For cultural awareness, here's an example of some of the programs we've done so far, and the list goes on and on. We've done Tamil Baler baskets, so traditional basketry, Chumash effigies, use of soapstone, Chumash cultural material information, traditional plant use, gathering of cultural material. So we'll go on field trips and actually gather material that we're going to use in our classes, and knowledge of Samala language. So we embed the language in our programs as much as possible. Community involvement. We have cultural classes that have attendance up to 60 community members, which is a great attendance for community programs, and it continues to grow as we continue to add more programs to our list. So we've had babies all the way up to elders participating in our cultural programs. With our Samala language program, we have ongoing learning of the language, of course. We have adult language classes, which are community-based classes. We have youth language classes that are taught twice a week through our after-school education program. Through this, we have learning sentence structure, the reading and writing of the language. Song creation, we were able to create an honor song for Maria Solares, which we'll sing tomorrow, which is her birthday, and the tribe will be having a celebration on the reservation. And we were able, with Dr. Applegate, to come up with a beautiful song honoring her, my grandmother. So, and then also includes story creations. We've created stories, some that are reader-friendly, simplified Samala. And this, yes, there is like an advanced Samala, and that's, what would you say, Richard? That was more like the old way of speaking the language. It can be a little bit more complex.
Yeah, but no holds barred, versus the Sidic run.
Yeah. So we've done a great job with that. Curriculum development of all ages. I have actually taught with the real little ones, I think it was 3 years old up to 5 years old. And what I found is that when I work with them and I ask them, what this is, they're not able to say what it is. However, if I lay out all the animals on the floor and I ask them to Putlish Shark, the children are able to go up and pick up the turtle. Or Putlish Hus, and they're able to and they can pick up all the animals and bring them to me. But I think because they're so young, they're able to take it all in but not be able to speak it yet. So we'll continue to work with them on that. So curriculum development of all ages. And we did a class actually on how to use our dictionary, because we knew that there was going to be some Shark. The children are able to go up and pick up the turtle. Or Putlish Hus, and they're able to and they can pick up all the animals and bring them to me. But I think because they're so young, they're able to take it all in and not be able to speak it yet. So we'll continue to work with them on that. So curriculum development of all ages. And we did a class actually on how to use our dictionary, because we knew that there was going to be some misuses of some words. So we wanted to do the best to help out our people and show them how to use the dictionary. Now it goes from Samala to English and then English to Samala. So naturally we're going to go to the English to Samala. So we're going to go from the English word to the Samala word. So hopefully that'll reverse the more Samala that we know. I'd also like to talk to you about Camp Kalawashak. It's our youth camp that we have the month of July, and this is where we do a lot of cultural programs, and again, language is part of the 5-week program. It's our time, 8 hours a day, 40 hours a week to work with our children, to teach them as much as we can about our culture and our language, and ceremonies. We've gone into leadership, sovereignty, all the things we feel that we may not be getting in the schools that we can teach them within 5 weeks that we have them. So we have a lot of fun. They did tule mats. They worked on they worked on some rabbit skin blankets, and of course we have fun swimming. We have recreation there as well. Some more pictures of our summer camp. And we have, I would say probably about 90% of my staff are all tribal from the reservation. The tribe has also established Chumash Cultural Days. We're in our, I believe, our 4th year of having California-style cultural days. And what you see here resembles the Nakaliofish, which is our dancing arena. And so we highlight different tribes all over California to come in and to participate in this cultural sharing. It is open to the public as well. What's really nice about it too is that through new song creations, dances, that this is the time and the place that we get ready and prepared for it to bring these dances out and share with the people as well. Some other projects and programs that we've embedded language into is Santa Ynez just finished our first tomo, and it's 30 feet long, and it will hold up to 6 paddlers. And we went out as a community and supported the making of it and did the lashing of the boat. And we've actually are honored by our captain, Reggie Pegling, to begin creating songs for the tomo that have to do with the crossing over to the island and strength and everything that's connected with paddling in the water. So what's nice is that we're also getting to know more about the tomo and the brotherhood of the tomo, which is going to help guide us with creating songs and prayers also for the tomo. We've also started a young men's singing group, and again, this has to do with language. In J.P. Harrington notes, what we found is that the men would sing with deer hoof rattles while the women would be out front dancing before them. And so the gentleman here in the green shirt is Tom Lopez, and he's one of our senior apprentices. And what we've taken on is a song project, and what we're working on is wax cylinder recordings and the Harrington notes to bring back some of the songs that may not be sung right now. And we're specifically looking at working with some of the young men. And so it's been actually quite popular, and they're having a great time with that as well. So through the songs, we also teach them what they mean, what they're for, and with the new songs, we'll be able to have more of a language breakdown of exactly what they're saying. Chumash basketry in the Harrington notes from Maria Solares, it also goes over what we use, what type of material we use for basketry, the junkus on junkus. The bottom picture shows the Tamil baler basket that we actually, we had about, I think, 35 women that came out and participated in that basket making class. And we just had such a great time. But again, we were able to embed language into that and teach the people about basketry at the same time. Going back to the Samala language program, we actually began the program that I've been involved with. Dr. Applegate was teaching before I had gotten involved, and that was, we began in the year of 2006. And what we did was we actually went out and visited the Paiute Reservation up in Bishop, California. And we had heard they had a great language program going on there with their people, and basically mirrored what they were doing. There's many tribes throughout the United States that have done really well with bringing back their language. And so Dr. Applegate and I hired the first set of apprentices to come through under the apprenticeship program. And of the 6, we have 5 apprentices that graduated to senior apprentices last year. And so we're going on 4 years in the program. And they're very talented individuals and very dedicated. We all come with different strengths in how we want to utilize the language. One of our apprentices, Carmen Sandoval, she has a really passion. She has a passion for medicinal plant use, the names of the plants in our language, and she's done a really great job of creating a list and including that in some of her language teachings as well. And actually, the top picture is the senior apprentices, and the bottom picture, we just hired a year ago 5 new apprentices. We call them the junior apprentices, and they're following in our footsteps. And they also work under Dr. Applegate as well. We also received some grant funding for immersion training, which is communication-based instruction. And so what we like to do is begin to use the language more in the spoken, and because we can write pretty good in the language. Thank you, Dr. Applegate, for that. So we can really, we can write quite a few sentences, stories, and so what we like to do is focus more on the speaking of the language, and we actually work with a trainer for that on acquiring that technique and utilizing it. Our community language programs, right now we have 6-week language programs, and we're calling them modules. So right now we're on our 4th module, and Dr. Applegate teaches that class with the senior apprentice assisting him with the classes. And what we're finding is that we're having a great turnout for our adult learners, and there is a strong desire to learn the language and be part of this great movement of reawakening. After school language programs, the bottom picture shows Kathleen Marshall, who's one of our other senior apprentices. She's our teacher for our after school program. And this is also a communication-based learning with total physical response, TPS. And basically what she's doing, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a paper, piece of green paper on the bottom, on the floor, and she has different colors in different areas, and she's asking the children to run to the green, the green paper, or run to the orange paper. And so it's putting that physical movement with the word. So, we're working with the children that way, and actually works great with the adults as well. American Indian language credentialing. Last year, Santa Ynez was able to work with the Hupa, Yurok, and the Karuk tribe up north, Northern California. And what we found is that California was in a unique situation where we have lots of tribes in California and many native speakers. And as of last year, they were not viewed as teachers in the school system. And if you were to teach in a classroom, you would have to have a credentialed teacher with you in the classroom. And so it was really hard, especially for the northern tribes, to have teachers, have the freedom to teach and be viewed as teachers and really masters of what they're teaching, which is their language. And there was also the issue of elders. You could have 60, 70-year-olds teaching classes, and again, still were not viewed as teachers. And the likelihood of a 60 or 70-year-old going back to school to get their bachelor's degree in linguistics, and more than likely, not even offering that language, particularly in the colleges, was not going to happen, pretty much. And so what happened was Santa Ynez came along and worked with a great author of the bill, Assemblyman Joe Cotto, and came up with AB 544, legislation that would allow native speakers to now have their teaching credential in a single subject, which is their language. And we're actually still celebrating the governor signing the bill this past November, and the law is now in place. And as of January of 2010, we can now apply for credentialing under the state of California. And so basically that means that we can now utilize the schools in helping bringing back our language. Many views of Native Californians, and I think throughout the United States, is that really the educational institutions took away our language. That should be where it should come back. It should be part of their day, their educational day, is taking a language course. So here we are with new credentialing and the ability to work with our children during the day. And this is our future, our children. This is our Samala youth singing group. So we look forward to working with them in the schools as well as on our reservation and teaching them about their culture and language. And what we're finding is that through the work that we're doing with our children and the work that we're doing with language in general from the apprenticeship program, it's actually caused a lot of elders to step up and talk about language, where this wasn't something that was just offered naturally. A year ago, we had one of our elders come out to our cultural days and share a baby lullaby that we've never heard before. And as Dr. Applegate mentioned earlier, the boarding schools, the trauma that was put on our people from boarding schools. And for my mother, she talks about some of the racism that she had to encounter in high school, and that's like 1960 to 1964. And so there's a lot of things that I think oppress the people from coming out and honoring and celebrating their culture and heritage. And I think what we're doing now is helping our elders feel a lot more comfortable. So when our elder came out and she said, "I'd like to share a baby lullaby song," it was, we all dropped our mouth and said, "Oh my gosh, we've never heard this song before." It's not on a wax cylinder recording, but our elders right here, our living elders right here, and she's going to sing it to us. And this is how it went. She came up and she said, "Okay, I'd like to sing a baby lullaby song," and this is how it goes. Hi-hi-naya, hi-hi-naya, hi-wish nani, hi-wish nani. So it was just as simple as that, and we were all in tears. Because it was the first time we've ever heard a song like that before. I think through the work that we're doing with language and the reawakening of the language, because it was never put to rest, it lies within us. It's part of us. The language wasn't totally gone. Harrington worked with Maria Solares, but she had 3 daughters that the language we know for sure was passed on to. They were speaking the language. It's just Harrington perhaps may not work with them. And who's to say even their children didn't have the language part of them. Now there was some language that was still being used. Animal names, songs still existed, stories. We have a story about the black dog. And these stories lasted, and they came from Maria Solares all the way down to the generations. So language was still in the community, but now we're going to take it to another level. And our goal is to bring it back fluently. And I think one of the things that we have to face as language learners, teachers, speakers, is that we want fluency to be 100%. We want to be 100% fluent and speak and be able to just, rattle off anything we want in the language and have communication and have it always in our community 100%. But what I've learned is that that's not more than likely something that's going to happen in my lifetime. But the work that we do in the next generation, that's what we'll be working towards, and continuing that forward momentum of continuing language and our children picking up where when we become elders or we need to stop. So with that, I'd like to say, Nakia Nash, thank you very much. Thank you, Anne. And open it up for questions. Oh, this is my,
And where, who made it and where it came from and the traditional use of it.
this is my Epsu. It's a junkus on junkus. It is made in traditional Chumash style basketry. It is made by Tima Link, who's a Santa Barbara Chumash woman. And it is a replication of a basket that was found out at the Santa Ynez mission. So I don't know if you're familiar with those lovely orange books, Chumash interactive sphere.
Yeah, material culture of the Chumash interaction
Yeah.
sphere or something like that.
Yeah, so those are actually at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History. Well, they're a great volume of books, and this was part of me again, wanting to help out with our women. Let's start wearing our basket hats again. And the use of it was for gathering, for gathering seeds and berries and so on. And I don't do that with this one though. It's too beautiful. I just cherish it too much. But again, it was another step forward of saying, we need to be proud of who we are, and we need to wear our basket hats again. Our men need to dance and celebrate and partake in dances and ceremonies and so on. So this is my episode.
It had another use, by the way. It was also a unit of measurement. So in one of the stories, somebody asked, well, how much does an epsuit full of acorns cost? So that's...
I have two questions. One for Mr. Applegate, is it?
Mm-hmm.
Often historic languages, especially those that are dying, are used by linguists to hypothesize what peoples these were originally related to linguistically.
Mm-hmm.
Where does that trail go for the Chumash languages?
Interesting
Or is
question.
it still
Well,
unclear?
There was
The second question is,
okay.
can I buy one of those hats, Eddie?
You'll have to find a basket weaver.
Years ago, there was a theory called Hokan, and it was postulated that a whole group of languages around the perimeter of California were all related, like Pomo, Achamawi, Natsukewi, and including Chumash. And it was based on pretty flimsy evidence. I think that theory has been pretty much disproven. So the upshot is finally that at this point they believe that the Chumash family is called an isolate. So it may be related. Of course, it's related to other languages, but it's such a time depth that you can't really recognize it anymore.
Oh, darn, I thought you were going to say it's related to Hawaiian, or it would solve the question of
No.
where all the people came from.
Well, I'll just back up a little bit with that historical piece there.
Uh-huh.
Everybody knows the history of something like Rome, where around the 1st century or so, here was this little town in Italy, and they made it. They spoke Latin, and the people everywhere else spoke whatever they spoke, and the Romans made it big. They spread out all over most of Europe and part of the Middle East. And so their language was spoken from Spain all the way to Romania. But 2,000 years later, you don't have Latin. You have a whole string of different languages that are partially intelligible to each other and partially not. And that's the same thing happened in California and in the Chumash territory too. So we can't really say exactly how long ago it was or where the Chumash came from, and there's no real reason to say they came from anywhere else based on what we know.
And our stories tell us, and what we believe as Chumash peoples, our creation was here. We didn't migrate across the Bering Strait. Our creation, our stories tell us we were created here. And so that's something we stand very firmly on.
I have a question. How did your ancestors speak to each other if there were so many different actual languages and not just dialects that were a bit different?
Well, what we do know is that the different languages that Samala had some of the same words as the Shmuwich, which is Barbareño, Santa Barbara people, and that my grandmother actually talks about going into Santa Barbara and being able to speak with the Indians over there. San Luis Chumash, their language is totally different. And there would not be, they would not have the ability to have conversations, be back and forth.
How about people on the islands? Did they speak with the people on the islands?
The Credentialing was quite different as well.
Yeah, Maria actually said when she was a little girl growing up, there had been the last of the people on the islands were taken off the island. I think there was an El Nino or something that disrupted the fishing, and they just couldn't make a living there. And the old trade patterns were disrupted, so they were brought to the mainland. And a bunch of Chumash people, by the way, this is an aside, but the term, the word Chumash is actually the word in all the Chumash languages for the island people. So when Maria Solares talked about, oh yeah, the Chumash lived over here, she meant the island. She didn't mean her own people, the Samala. And then later, the term Chumash came to mean anybody of the whole Chumash nation. But anyway, there were islanders living near where she was, and she said, I heard them talk. I can remember 2 words of their language, but that's all I heard, or that's all I remember. So she couldn't understand it.
Right.
Would that be akin to your comment of the similarities between the Spanish, French, and the other Latin-based Romantic languages? That sort of linguistic pattern. So it was somewhat semi-intelligible to one another.
Yeah, she made the comment, for example, that she could make out Barbareño. She said Obispeño, which is quite different. Obispeño is kind of like the French of Chumash, because it's so different from the other languages. But she said it was mucho trabajo.
I spent all last weekend watching Roots, the television series in the 70s, and it really made me realize the legacy of oral history and how accurate it really can be. And I'm just tickled pink to see that, we now have 85-word forecasts. Are there any states other than California that are doing similar programs?
Absolutely, and actually I forgot to mention that we're very grateful to the Oregon tribes and the Washington tribes, because that's kind of how we figured legislation is the way to do this, because tribes are sovereign nations and we should have to deal with, it's a government-to-government agreement, and not a government-to-state board, agreement. And so we looked to the northern tribes, and there it was. Each state, we're actually, I think, the 14th or 15th state to have this type of law in place for native languages. And another thing that's nationwide, what's going on that we're involved with is schools have what you call Common Core standards, and now we are moving to making this nationally, that native cultures and languages are put into those Common Core standards. That way, all schools throughout the nation understand this and respect that as well. So there's still lots of work to be done. However, I'm excited to be a teacher for my daughter's school and know that she'll have the language part of her curriculum. Yes, ma'am.
Is this kind of program we offer here in Ventura, or Chumash doing anything here in this county?
I'm not aware of that, no.
I know of, there's I don't think I'm not positive I have the information correct, but there's a graduate student from UC Santa Barbara who studied the Ventureño language, and he's getting classes here, to my understanding. And I think it's probably only for tribal members.
But they don't have a program like they do here in Santa Ynez.
Well, I think they do. They're working community-based programs, which basically is what we're doing. Yeah. And I believe that's what Julie Tumalay.
I know she's very active to educate us in New Zealand.
Yeah, isn't she wonderful?
Yes, she is.
She's a lovely lady. Yes, sir.
Yes, I think in some of my readings I come across the word Chumash was something that the Gabrielino Indians called the people of the northern islands, and I think they used the term Michumash, which meant the people that make beads, bead money. Is that incorrect?
That is, the people were called the Chumash, and the island, Santa Rosa Island, another name for it was Limu, but it was called Michumash, the place of the Chumash. But the connection there, the Chum part, the word in most of the Chumash languages for money, for shell money, is Alchum or Anchum. And then the chum part has to do with, well, that's the part that means value or money. So the chumash, or the people, like the bead makers, would be one translation of it. The money people. Because that was the foundation of the economy of the islanders. They made shell money, and they brought resources over to the islands to feed themselves that way.
Any other questions? I think before I end, what I'd like to just mention is what continues to grow. I know within all of us language apprentices, with Dr. Applegate's guidance, is a lot of the stories that pertain to our families. There's lots of genealogy, lots of stories. Dr. Applegate and I were talking on the way down here, and there's so many, and one of the ones that are really special to me is Maria Solares and her mother and her grandmother going north, traveling north, gathering. So it's just those stories that always keep me connected, and stories of my grandparents and ancestry, and I think that's really truly what language means. I know for me is that strong connection to my roots. And what I'd like to do actually before we end real quick, I want to read you some of Coyote and Salmon. I'm sure you want to hear some of the language. Okay. So this is Coyote and Salmon. I'll read you a small part of it. Hini dini kui hukau, gutme, insile skutne, insile su uwamu, kwaki se lupini wash, ihuha isiuktun, suka kaknupino, si kaktincho, itiwananai, nokulish chayash kuper suke, kalishtu, smolokin, imolomol, inishjo satuk, slochochen, Shna napai, ipumolomol, iskuti awatikok, kasipi hukau, kupe nakashun noku, kasukulush kasu, I see, ini kashjoho. So I'll read you in English what that means. When Coyote was still a person, he was poor and he had no relatives. He had no food. Coyote lived there at Siuktun. Then, what am I to do, he said. It would be good if I travel around. I take to the road and see what I find. He traveled to the mountains. He was unhappy, he was hungry. He was going up to the mountain when he saw a stink bug. Coyote said, I'll dine and I'll eat. He took it and he ate it. Ah, he said, it's good now. I've already had a nibble of food. Maybe I'll chance upon something else. So that's a very small part of Coyote.
You want to hear the rest of it?
Yeah.
Okay. Not in Samala, I'll just tell it. Okay, so Coyote found a stink bug, he ate it. He came across a potato bug, he ate that. He said, my hunger is somewhat satisfied. Now I'm thirsty. So he climbed up on top of a hill and looked around. I'm looking for green. There's going to be water where there's green. Ah, there. So he heads down the hill. He finds this nice pool shaded by a big sycamore. And he was kneeling down to drink. He said, wait a minute, somebody's watching me. And he looked in the water, and there was a big salmon underneath the roots of the sycamore looking at him. He thought, the stink bug and the potato bug weren't really that filling. So how can I get the salmon out? He didn't have fishing gear, he didn't have anything, but he's got his cunning. So he sang, Napa napka ipko woch, shupkuti utsus, sepona wopo. Come out, coyote. Come out, salmon, and watch your Uncle Coyote dance. And the salmon flopped up on the bank, and the coyote kind of kicked it a little further away from the edge, and he knelt down to drink. Hey, there's still somebody watching. Pretty soon he had a pile of salmon, big pile of salmon, well away from the edge of the bank, so they couldn't get back in. I'm going to eat. So he built himself a fire, he dug a pit, lined it with rocks, heated the sand. Carefully, when the sand and the rocks were hot enough, he laid the salmon in, something like 20 of them, heads down, like a starburst with the tail sticking out. He piled the rocks back on, the leaves, the sand, and it takes a little bit of time for this to cook. And he watched the steam was beginning to rise. That looks good. You know, I really want to be empty for this. I really want to be able to enjoy all this fish. So I'm going to go over to the ocean and drink salt water and purge myself. So he heads off. Meanwhile, up in the tree this whole time, Kush Kush, the magpie, had been watching. And Kush Kush flies down, lands there, waits a little bit. The fish are cooked, perfectly cooked. So he digs them out, eats them all, except for the tails, and puts the rocks, puts everything back just the way it was before, with all 20 tails in the starburst around, and waddles back over to the tree, kind of hoists himself back up. He's hanging upside down, his belly is so full, but he's thoroughly satisfied with himself. Meanwhile, Coyote goes to the ocean, drinks salt water, vomits. He says, I'm really clean inside now. I can really enjoy that salmon. He heads back over the hill, back down to his pool. He sees the smoke, the steam rising from the fire pit, and all the circle of tails. And he says, but wait. This is too good to just blow off so fast. I really want to clean myself out. I want to be able to enjoy it all. I'll head over to the San Joaquin Valley and eat alkali to clean myself out. Really clean myself out. So he went over to the San Joaquin Valley, ate alkali, became crawling back with the runs. But he was empty. He was completely cleaned out from one end to the other. So he's got room for the salmon. He got back to the fire pit. There they are, these crisp tails. He took one, nibbled on it. The first thing he's eaten for ages at this point. Nibbled on it. Wow, that's perfectly done. He ate another, ate another, ate another. Pretty soon he'd eaten all the tails. Now I'm going to get into the feast itself. He pulled off the tail, pulled off the rocks, the sand, the leaves. There's nothing there. There's a little spot of juice on this one rock. He was licking the rock, and then he heard this laughter from up above, and it was Kush Kush was saying, "Lick the stones, you. That's all you're going to get. I ate the salmon." And so here's Kush Kush, magpie, hanging upside down because he's so full, hanging by his feet from the tree, laughing. And Coyote said, "You, I'm going to get you for that." So he found himself a sharp piece of flint and began to saw at the tree. And it took him about 4 days to saw through the tree. It was an improv tool. It wasn't the saw he left at home. It was just a piece of flint. But finally the tree begins to teeter, and so as it's falling, guess what happens? Kush Kush flies off to the next tree. And Coyote said, "You're not getting away that easy." He's still got the flint. It's a little bit duller, a little bit smaller, but he's still got it. He saws away at that tree. After about 4 or 5 days, that tree teeters, begins to fall. Kush Kush flies to the next tree. And at that point, Coyote said, I think I better give this up. So.
If anything, Coyote definitely keeps us entertained. The mischief he gets himself into.
And one of Maria's sayings was something like, there's no end to the doings of Coyote. There's no end to the telling of the doings of Coyote.
Thank you very much.